Yeah, you see, passwords are like hot potatoes. What do I mean by that is you really shouldn't want to hold on to it. You can imagine once you hold on to something of value, which is passwords, a lot of value, especially what's locked behind it. The longer you hold, the higher the risk.
Welcome to CyberOXtales, the podcast where cybersecurity scenarios meet reality. In each episode, we'll sit together with the top cyber pros to dissect major security incidents, giving you actionable insights and practical advice to fuel your playbooks and success. Ready? Let's go.
Hello. I'm Neatsun Ziv, and I will be your host today at CyberOXtales. With me today is Sam. Sam, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
First of all, good to see you again.
Always a pleasure.
I am Sam. Hi, everybody. I'm EPAM's global CISO. Been security for 35 years. I'm calling from my home office here in San Francisco. So if you hear any animals in the background, that's my zoo in my house. But pleasure to be here.
So it's a pleasure, and I want to dive immediately into a story that I heard recently. It's one of our customers told us, look, one of the cloud providers that we're working with, they got a notification on a password that somehow were leaked in part of the public Git repositories out there, and they immediately rotated some of the keys, which makes perfect sense, but it drove them into a madness of rotating the keys inside the code and so on. So as you can imagine, you can spend a lot of hours just trying to recover from such an event. What is your approach on embedding passwords into the code?
Approaches don't. That's the first. So I think that's the key thing. Anytime hard code an asset inside the code is extremely dangerous, and it's a longer topic. It's a very long topic. Cut me off by any means. So I know you. So
Oh,
please
we've
go
got time.
back and forth on it. But I think one of the key thing is that it starts all the way from awareness, which is developers not knowing there is another way to go, right? They not knowing that there is a proper way to manage and handle your key. I always say keys are like hot potatoes, right? You don't want to hold them for too long. Any kind of credentials, you don't want to hold them for too long. Anytime you're holding it, you're responsible for it. It's like I was joking with another CISO recently. I said, if I ask you to hold $100,000 in cash in a transparent bag, and you walk around downtown for a day, would you do it? You're asking yourself to be the target. So anything of value, attackers will look for it. And if you think that just embedding in the code, that's not the place. Not trying to get too technical on it, but look at the heap. Just I don't know what the compile structure is in that code base, but look at the heap. It's got to be fully canonical. Most of the time, it's fully canonical. And some people thought that if I encrypt it at rest, it would be fine, but runtime, it's still got to be canonical. And so I think a lot of that aspect has to do with, people not knowing what really could, happen, thinking that no, 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 nobody would find it. That's exactly what attacker looks for. So I would say strongly suggest that number one, make sure that there's an awareness that things like that, people will find it. Once people are aware that what could be done with something like this, which is they can scan your code, pick that out, do bad things with it, then the awareness start to change. But you also need the stick, if you will, besides just the education, which is much more around the scanning part, looking through the system because somebody would miss it. Some junior engineer would come up not being trained properly or not knowing about it. They might actually put some, critical asset into it. And it's not just, passwords, it's also URLs, it's also, fixed infrastructure information. Those are all the things that lateral attackers would actually look for. So I think it starts with the awareness. It's a bit of a culture, defensive thinking culture that you push towards the engineers. And then you also need the scanning. Then last but not least, of course, good containment. Good containment. You want to contain the binaries. You don't want to just throw the binaries out there. It's much more difficult with mobile, but for anything that you can run in the cloud, don't just throw the binaries out there. Don't just throw the codes out there. If you do that, people could see it, makes it very difficult. So, but that's a short form of it.
So I really like the analogy of the hot potato. I'm definitely going to take this away with me. So if we can just say what's one thing that we learned from this episode before we even get started, it's like passwords are like hot potatoes. It's an amazing analogy. I think it's something that we're definitely going to pump into the industry right now. It's like
That's your
going to
clickbait,
be
huh?
coined for you. It's like Sam, just password equals hot potatoes. So I think that the next question is really that usually you have like one security expert versus a few hundreds of developers, and you can't just go to them each one by one and say, "Hey, have you heard about hot potatoes? And do you have some passwords in in your code?" So how do you get to the point that you're able to take this notion and actually get them to each one of the developer, especially as they're constantly rotating in and out of the organization?
This is a very complicated problem, as you know. Um,
I know.
we have over 50,000 engineers, and trust me, it's, the scale of it's daunting. But I can tell you that there are multiple levels of it. First and foremost, let's map it out a little bit. You always going to have multiple, I would say, four concentric circles of people of awareness and security. You have your experts. Those are the people that, live and breathe. You and I would, do security. That's what we do. The experts would do what they need to do, and they would naturally inspire people around them in some ways. If you sit next to me, you don't leave your phone on a table and walk out to the room. For example, yesterday was a workshop. One of the guys left the phone on the table and walked out to the restroom. It's a customer meeting. He looked at me, he saw me immediately go back and pick up the phone. He knows it's a no-no. Your asset stays with you, right? So your geared retention, always. And so there was part of that would inspire that defensive culture. And that circle is the innermost circle, I would call it. Then there was the next circle, which is your champions, your folks that, I call it champion. But these are the folks that would actively go out. They know enough about security, and these are folks that you need to encourage them, but they know about security on at least on a lot of the standards. They understand what's good measure and so on. They're not doing security per se, but those are folks that you can actually go out and they would champion defensive, and they're both your eyes and your ears. They go out when they see something bad, they tell people about it. Sometimes they bring it back and let me know about it, and then I would actually go help them. That's the second circle. Then there was the advocate. The advocates are much more people that they don't know too much about it, but they actually have a respect for security. What does that mean? They would actually raise, those are the people usually when there was a close near incident that's going to happen, or a soft incident, I call them. When that happens, they're the first one to actually call me up. He said, Sam, I'm not too sure about this, but there was this, that's happening. Then the farthest outside are the ones that think security is a problem. I don't want to deal with it. Call me when I have to. I'll go through a compliance. You're always going to have those concentric circles. The question is, how do you break some of those barriers, which is, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but how do you break those circles, which is injecting security champions and security architects into each and every major project? It's a must. Because just by having that person in that project, just like me sitting in that room, people are afraid of leaving their phone on the table, that naturally raised the defensive thinking mindset. It will be a bit of a resistance at the beginning, all the way it gets to a point that everybody, without even like spending too much time on it, they realize that they start thinking about things like that. For example, you see, the funny thing about culture is, and I call this, security culture, is it has a lot to do with what we think is the norm. If the guy sitting next to me says it's okay to write down a password and put it on a piece of paper, the next guy kind of feel naturally is like, oh, that's okay, that's all right. But if there is one guy in there that looked at that and said, whoa, wait a minute, you know what could happen to this and so, everybody calls that guy, oh, come on, you're just, and then that cycle start to go and the awareness start to grow. So you have to push and inject these champions out into all the different major projects. You can, as you said, have one-to-one ratio. It's impossible. But as long as they're at the critical point, which is
So wait,
at the
help me
designing point.
with this for a second. What's the playbook here? So you're saying 4 layers, okay, definitely you need to have your core, your extended, the furthest, and the rest of the population. What's your playbook here? How do you get it from what you just said? If I want to start my own program right now, how do I get this started?
Oh, good. Let me sit back then. So I've
Okay, no,
gone through
take
this
your time.
multiple times from scratch. So let me sit back a little bit. First, identify your expert. That's a clear goal, and you
How do you
really
do
have
that?
to identify it and
Take
separate
me
them.
through the details. How do you do
So
that?
your expert, the security team, for example, those are the guys that expert. Security guys that works on security projects, which is you go through your list of projects, depending on how big your company is. So for example, in my company, Obviously, those that actually worked on PKI system, those are people who works on security products. Those guys are actually been through security training. Now, I know a lot of people are iffy about training, and security training is very important, though. Certification is very, very important. You pull out everybody that has the right certification. That doesn't guarantee they're right off the bat, expert level, but it gives you a baseline. So if the guy has an OSCP, if the guy has a CEH, if the guy's CompTIA, I know those guys. I pulled them all together. That's my concentric circle. That's my first circle. The second circle, when you actually go through your advocate, those are the guys that you actually have to pull them in, starting from scratch in the beginning. And I've actually gone through this multiple times, as I mentioned before. A great way to do this is form a guild, and let them come in. Let them come in. A lot of people would come in. That guild would want to mingle with the expert. So you pick out a couple of experts, let them do brown backs, let them do discussion, and the guy that's a champion would start to float up. I found a couple of guys that did crypto analysis because I was doing a crypto class as a brown bag. When I start talking about cryptography, all of a sudden 5 or 6 people popped up, and turns out they know a lot more than I do in the space. And then I was like, perfect, great, wonderful. So use brown bag, use a guild, and start wheeling them in. Those are the ones that, because you're not only getting the expert, the champion needs to be passionate. That's the problem. If they don't come to you, you go get them. Even if you can get them as a champion, they're still not going to seriously go out there and encourage it, because those are the guru type. They sit in the corner like when I was in my 20s. They're not going to go encourage the rest of the people. So use your brown bags, use your guild, pull them in. That's when you get your champion. The advocates are usually, they would come to you. You need to encourage that. That's a different angle altogether. So you got the expert, you got the champion. The advocates are people that you need to excite them, which is you do your all hands, you do your town hall. I do my briefings once a quarter. I explain to them what the latest attack vectors are. They're interested enough to be dangerous, but at the same time, they hear certain things, and they're like, next time when they see something that's bad, Sam, hey, they want a little attention, they want to know a little bit more about it, they raise their hands, and next time when they see it, they come up. You put them down, there's an advocate, you give them a badge. We have an internal system that we actually give people badges. So these are completely separate. It's almost like tagging people. They know it, they're proud of it. I give them an advocate badge. People actually see that that's a security advocate. And I don't do it lightly. They don't just get it for free, right? So when they actually get that badge, they know they're an advocate. Then from that onwards, the rest of it is you have to intentionally go through your project and start injecting the champions into it. So you got your champions, you need to inject into it. That is much more of a call from a development side and a security side. You need folks that basically says, this project, it's really about cloud security. I need a cloud architect into it. But all that is trying to push security as early as possible in the architecting and design phase.
Okay, so I get how you build the program. It makes perfect sense. But I think that one of the things that I'm seeing is that the different CISOs approach or attitudes towards how do you do this? And it sounds like you're taking a very, very collaborative way. But I'm not sure this is the common approach that I'm seeing right now. Can you just give us some insights? Meaning you're an expert in this industry, you've been there around a while, and I think that it changed from where it used to be like 20 years ago. How do you see this?
It has changed a lot. You're 100% right. So I remember when I was writing security coding, because I was in a product side, and I remember at that time the CISOs were always, is it FIPS 182 compliant? It is. Okay, give me a checklist, and I never get to ask any question. I always got a yes or no. That was the just say no CISO, we call those, which is CISOs are say no, 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 and you only talk to them. You keep your fingers crossed. You only talk to them at the end of the process. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but anybody actually built a product, has security code in there, you would understand what I mean. They only come in to tell in the process, and then you realize you got to go or no go. That was the old CISO, which is they're gatekeepers. Mostly, they're not tactical CISO, meaning that they're not technology based. They're much more in compliance only. Not that compliance not important, but they're only in compliance and liability only. Those are the old CISOs. Now, I actually had an eye-opening experience just, a week ago. I was at a customer workshop, and we were going through a collaboration. We've worked with this customer for a few years now. Great customer, lots of challenges. We love challenges, work together. Security was a big part of it. I was observing at the table how the CISO, which is a great guy, by the way, great guy, the CISO himself is not so much directly from cyber. He's actually, cyber experience, but not directly from. But what was amazing about him was everybody was turning around to him and say, "Hey, what do you think?" This is during the brainstorm. Most of the time, I joke about this, when I say people worry about the phone, but that is actually true. Most of the time, when a CISO sits in, everybody got their hands crossed. They're like this. They're like, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to get in trouble. And so that was the old days. In this case, I witnessed this gentleman have a connection with each and every one of them. They actually want to ask the CISO for advice, which is exactly what you want.
So
That
wait, before we wait, I need to
yeah,
understand something here. So the CISO in the old days, where the role was actually to be a gatekeeper, saying we had a committee saying this is the acceptable risk level, and go make sure that we are not outside of the agreed zone. And what you're saying is CISOs right now take more liberty to say, yeah, it's not black and white. This is a grayish. We kind of can prove it, and they actually got more authority, or they've gained enough credibility within the risk committee to actually say, you know what, trust me when I'm saying this is not that big of a risk. It's within the boundaries that we agreed on. How does it actually work behind the scenes?
I think it's both. By the way, Jeff Pollard from Forrester, he's got a great article about this, which I think he calls it the loss of opportunity because of security or something in that phase. But it's basically all about the CISO's role is no longer just to, as you said, limit that risk. That is a role. That is a responsibility. Trust me, I have that. I'll get fired if I don't do that. But there is a huge loss of opportunity when people are not designing things right, when they're not actually asking the right question early up front, when CISOs and security teams are not involved. Now, it's a two-way street. There's a reason why they didn't ask CISOs before, to be very honest with you, because the CISOs before were non-technical, compliance only, checklist only, more project management than anything else. They would ask them, they get a blanket answer and says, I need a yes or no from this control in CSF 2.0. Well, what's that going to get me? Not much. So it's a two-way street. I think it's part because the CISO is becoming more tactical and more technical that's involved in it. And in security, tactical is a good word. That means it's practical, right? In the other side of it, it's also because, as you pointed out, I think for developers, they start to understand that security, it's not just a problem somewhere else. They know when there is a breach, ultimately, who's going to get in trouble? Everybody. I think they start to see that. And so that collaboration is happening in a much better way right now as we see it.
So I really like this. What you're saying is you get more authority, and you can in return take this authority and
More
freedom and
value.
actually use it to exactly to go inside and say, you know what, instead of just black and white, I can actually get into details, and by those small details give more exception, more leeway, and it allows you to create a better collaboration versus just gatekeeper.
100%. And
Okay,
we
so
we talked about that a lot. We talked about security by design a lot. We always talk about that. But to be honest with you, that's exactly what's needed for security by design.
now let's take it to the frontline managers and managers in engineering, because some of them that grew up in parallel to the older CISO generation, they get to the position saying, if we need to invest in security champion program, I need to pay for that. It's my headcount. Instead of doing dev work, that this is what they should be doing, they're now doing other things in your guild. So how do you communicate with them? How do you explain to them the risk versus reward? And it's a good investment for them to have.
Great question. So again, it's a carrot and stick. So I'll give you both. I'll give you both the carrot and stick, and it doesn't work just one way. So just the fear part, just the top-down part would not work. But without that, it's not possible either. I think a part of it is you need to have a framework in security in the company. And the framework does two things. It does baselining, which is if you pick out, let's say, the CIS 20, okay? So you go through and say all project has to go through the controls, or if you're more sophisticated, you go CSF, and then you say these are the 400 controls, you minimize it and say these are the set. You go from a top down, and then say here's the framework. The framework does two things. It helps people put the mindset in. They understand what needs to be done to some degree. Now they will look at that as a compliance, as a tax, and so on. That's why I say that's more the stick. They will look at that and say, okay, I got to go through this. But it helps frame the baseline so that you don't have, because you can manage this much of variant. If you have to manage this much, it's impossible to go through all those. Framework allows you to narrow that down to a smaller set. Then from that smaller set, you can start to talk about the carrot. What is the carrot? So for example, you need to give them some incentive. I don't think you have to go as far as to do gamification. I've tried that, didn't get me too much, but it's just probably me. But it will help them if they actually start to see that by building secure code, it's just not a burden, but it actually is encouraged. For example, if somebody did certain certification and passed a certain set of certification, they actually get, an award of some sort, so
Yeah.
that there is a carrot to that. So I give that, for example, as a challenge. When I provide that challenge, I say, if you're proud of your code, present it in my brown bag and basically said, this is what I actually do to mitigate a certain attack vector. You present that, and I looked at that. You get your accolade, from your team and say, wow, that's very cool that you did that. So there was an encouragement towards that. You see, the funny thing is, I think security and engineers, we have one thing very much in common. We love challenges. We love challenges. We absolutely love, when you tell me there was a bar, I jump, right? So I think that's exactly what would actually help to actually foster that. And when that circle starts to happen, it's almost like, playing capture the flag where everybody's like, okay, you're in that game. But you start to see this guy's pretty good, that I'm pretty good, this guy's pretty good. You start to have that little bit of competition, positive competition on it. That's when you start to realize that, okay, security is actually much more interesting, much more exciting. And that's how I got sucked in, which is very much about, security. There is no such thing as a certain level only. You don't just do security on UI. You don't just do security in kernel. You have to understand such a wide spectrum of things because the attacker doesn't care. And when you start to see that, you learn very, very quickly. I see a lot of young people getting into security for that reason. I do proactively coach, folks. Some of them is my daughter's friend, some of them, other people's friend, and I connect with them. And out of the people that I coach right now is 50-50. 50 executive, 50 are very, very young, fresh out of college, and they just want to go into cyber. And it's very interesting what they're interested in. They all first wanted to know about ethical hacking, because that's a sexy word. They all want to
I
know
must say,
about
in
that.
my time, it was networking, network
It was
security.
networking, sure. There was
Yeah.
quite a bit. Right now is all about how do I break into things? How do I do that? And you see a lot of that. When that start to happen, they start to then hone into a certain aspect of it. Some of them lean toward more on data. Some of them lean towards much more on identity. Some of them lean towards on AppSec. Some of them lean towards more on cloud infrastructure. A lot of them on cloud infrastructure because they learn a lot about cloud. But they start to branch out. They start to branch out, and you lead them towards it, and you find a certain space to it. But so there's a lot of, and all that speaks to, if you have that encouragement, if they see that curiosity about security, that what I call, check every corner, which is, the mindset that you always check every corner, which is the defensive thinking mindset, you realize that there is a whole world to it.
So the things that you're saying right now, are those things that are really industry specific to your industry, or are you saying, no, this is generic, it works across all the industries?
So most of my career has been product companies, right? So more recently, within the last 10 years, is more service companies and so on. I could tell you was true. There are some differences between service companies, product companies, and within verticals. And I'll only speak to what I know, obviously. So I've been in a number of ISVs, obviously. That's my forte. For ISVs, the drivers for the competition, the interests, and government certification, those are ones that it's a good driver. So if you tell them you need to be FIPS 140 compliant, that driver is real. They see that. When you tell them that you need CSF, framework for it,
Mm-hmm.
that driver is real. And I think for a lot of the product company, they see this driver. For a service company, is bigger set because we have a lot more developer in this case, and you need to spend a lot more time in community building. For the product company, usually smaller teams, you spend a lot more time structuring it, which is you figure out what the structure is. Here's a VP engineering for this product. Here's a VP engineering for that product. This product has a lot of critical assets in it. This product has a PKI system. They built their own for some reason. This guy has, so and so. You know what the high risk items are, so you built that off your risk management framework, and then you can actually decipher. For service company, very, very different. For us, large set, I can get into more. I don't know how that resonates with the rest of the folks in, other industry, but you will see that for that, it cuts across, and you need to spend a lot more time pulling them in, because it's so much in a certain scale, and the community building is so much more important because there's always extra work for them to some degree in all these different learnings, but they want to learn. So you have to spend a lot more time pulling them in. Specific verticals, I can tell you, for example, like, healthcare, obviously, heavy on regulation, heavy on compliance, a lot of data concerns and risk around those. You see there was a lot more ask, and there was a lot more interest, and there was a lot more push around understanding, data privacy and data breach and so on. There was a lot more push around it. For financial is, maybe I shouldn't pick one of my favorite, but you see that security folks and financial folks are really, really good typically. The reason for that is because they're being driven to, they're holding the gold, they're holding the money, the bag and the cash. We're not holding it, they're the one holding it most of the time. So obviously they got pushed a lot into driving towards a lot. So you see that there was investment usually on a financial institute, especially on the retail side, but it's also investment side. You see a lot of the security folks are much more driving towards deeper EPSEC, deeper on, what they could do to obfuscate data and so on. So I see a lot of that from that aspect. Manufacturing and supply chains are much more newer, more difficult because there was so much scatter attack, and there was so much around legacy. There was a certain, I'm being biased, but there was a certain sense of, hey, what else can we do besides, put a wrapper around that TCP Modbus and, that port. It's what else can we do? What else? And everybody flattened their network, so there's no more lateral attacks. So we tell them, break them up, and so for manufacturing is a challenge. I'll just leave it at that. Manufacturing is critical, but it's a big challenge on the security folks. And kudos to everybody trying within that industry. I think it needs a lot more support, a lot more effort, but it's a difficult battle.
Amazing, Sam. First of all, thank you very much for taking the time and sharing your wisdom with us. It's been amazing. Any final words? Shout outs to people on your team?
I say this a lot. I'll leave you with two things. One is check every corner. Check every corner. I tell that to my family. What do I mean by that? Train yourself. You walk out the street, check your corners. Train yourself, you turn around corner. Development, engineering, coding is the same thing. Train yourself to check every corner. The second thing is, I said that I went to a conference, and I truly believe it. It's a bit of a, life philosophy. I posted out, recently as well, an article on it, is that never find yourself in a fair fight. What do I mean by that? I'm not asking people to cheat, but truly, never find yourself in a fair fight. Is that you do need to understand that the attacker always have the element of surprise, recon. They understand you more than you know about them. They can wait. They can do anything to you at any point of time versus you have to be, watching. So you need to up your game. Don't find yourself in a fair fight. Take whatever advantage you can. If you can reduce your attack vector surface, reduce your attack surface. If you can actually get your team to invest into layers and layers and layers of security, do the best you can. Prioritize them. Don't do it blindly. Otherwise, you're going to have to maintain it. But prioritize them. But don't find yourself in a fair fight.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And beside, of course, the ultimate tip that you gave us today, which is passwords are like hot potatoes. I really appreciate the insights.
Are they going to brand me as the hot potato guy now? Anyway, good to see you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
That's a wrap on another episode of CyberOXtales. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your peers. Visit us at ox.security/podcast to access all episodes and exclusive content, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.